You can sit there, you can sit here, where.
That's what the guys, but you can sit wherever you want to.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions? That might be wise to make sure all of.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. You want me to stand here? You want me to stand there? Can I just stand?
Grace, can you hear Sophia? No, I can't hear the purple lady.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear whoever's sitting next to Edward. Say something again, Sophia.
Can you?
Well,
Don't turn towards them. Don't turn. Keep it up. Yeah, but I didn't have the mic.
that's why.
Yeah.
Hello.
My TB is not contagious.
Yeah, cool. How you doing?
How are you doing?
Good. I spent a little time with Alonzo this afternoon.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Hopefully it was good.
I think we got too much junk up here. What do you think?
Was that?
Uh-oh, got an echo.
Am I on? What?
That's a little better. Like you don't hear the.
No, we don't hear. Well, that needs to
there you
be
are.
killed. How do we avoid that?
We can't because we need to hear the people that are on that.
That's, you don't think it's going to bleed back in? So let me make sure I understand this. We just have to talk and try to tune that out. All right. Got it. Say a prayer. Where's the priest? I sure don't. I sure don't. Can you count to 5? Hello. Well, it's a work in progress. No, that's not. I think I wish I'd have said no to this. What do you think?
I think you're fine standing in the front there.
3 more minutes.
Whatever you do, leave Donald Trump out of
Check
this,
one.
okay?
Don't what?
Whatever you do, leave Donald Trump out of this.
I think it's live streaming.
My sister, the Republican judge in Dallas County, I was talking to her before the election. She said, I gotta go put up my Biden sign in the front yard.
We can hear everything.
Biden, what are you doing? She down my throat. She was just couldn't be talked to.
We
Yes.
can hear everything.
That's fine.
Testing, testing.
She put a sign up. I mean,
It's on.
so
It's on.
she was irrational.
As you're watching up there, what's your name, Grace, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Echo, like a continuous.
I do not hear an echo now.
But you heard it before?
I heard it before, but the echo is completely gone. It sounds very clear. In
Okay.
case you do.
That's really important because if she doesn't hear it, then the rest of the world won't.
Won't hear it. Okay.
Just tell me we're okay.
Yeah, we should be okay. We're okay. I'm also going to be listening over here independently.
I need Wi-Fi. You want to do it?
So go to your Wi-Fi available networks. There's one called Monitor Wi-Fi. Right there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Monitor Wi-Fi. And then I'm gonna put this here. Here's the password.
In the middle.
Check.
No one's gonna hack that.
Check, Meg, check. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, no one's gonna remember it either.
All right, we got about 30 seconds.
Does that look like it?
No. All right, thank you. Thank you. Why didn't it connect it? Oh, there it is. Phones.
Yep, make sure they're muted, please. And did that Wi-Fi kick it for you?
It's, yeah, it's coming on. Hmm?
Do you want Edwards?
All right, guys, you're live.
I'm Nick Nerk, President of Futuro RGV, and welcome to our discussion of the 8th Constitutional Amendments on the November ballot. And I want to thank Stephen Winter, the monitor, and Gilbert Ramil for digital team media, and Milo Rodriguez. Yes, I want to thank them because they're the techies who make it possible for us to live stream and record this. And this discussion will be available on our Facebook page and also on the Futuro RGV website up until the time of the election. So if you're watching now, fine, but you can watch, and anybody in Texas can watch until the election. And I want to remind you that early voting started today. And so obviously information about the locations and the relevant polling and election information is available. The League of Women Voters guide, which can be found at vote411.org. And I think you'll find that very valuable. And our discussion today will be moderated by Davis Rankin, who's our vice president, but also on KURV, the 710.
710 Talk Radio and around the world.
Okay, very good. And our panelists are Edward Yao, he's president of the Rio Grande Valley League of Women Voters, and his associate, Sofia Kennedy, who is also with the League of Women Voters. And we also have on Zoom, and our techies are going to make sure that that gets into it. And that is, why don't I have her name here?
Grace Chimene.
Grace, I'm sorry, Grace, who is president of the Texas League of Women Voters. So Grace, we're very glad to have you here on Zoom from
I'm
Austin.
happy to be here.
And we also have two of our Futuro RGV Advisory Council members, Jim Darling, who is the former mayor of the city of McAllen, and Roberto Haddad, who is legal
Hello.
counsel for DHR Health. So we're very fortunate to have some very knowledgeable people here. The whole aim of this is to, one, give you information about the late ballot propositions. But for the most part, ballot propositions are pretty boring, but you do need to know what they say. And for you people who do care about your vote and actually go out and vote, you need to know what they say. And so we hope to provide that tonight. And the other thing is we want to stress the importance that you get yourself registered. If you're not registered, you can't vote in November. But if you get registered right away, you can be sure that you can vote on the 2022 primaries and general midterm elections next year. So at this time then, before we start the discussion, I want to thank our sponsors who make it possible for us to do these kinds of discussions. And so our sponsors are Rhodes Enterprises, Clark Chevrolet, Sam Garcia Architect, Frost Bank, Valley Land Title Company over there, IBC Bank, LNF. You could point to the
Okay.
Rio Bank, DHR Health, Ernie Williams, and
Copy zone.
Copy Zone, Upper Valley Management, and Crazy Susan's live video solutions, which Nilo is recording on live stream. So
That's the one everybody will remember, Crazy Stupid Live.
Which we're about to start.
That's right.
and with that, I'd like to turn it over to our people from the League of Women Voters who are going to tell you about the 8 propositions and give you some brief pros and cons for each one. And at that time then, Davis will take over as moderator and we'll have a general discussion of these very knowledgeable people. How mindset
What
are
is
Rio
this?
Grande Valley communities and how it might affect you. And then hopefully you'll have the information you need to go and vote. So, Edward, why don't we?
I'll have it for Grace. Grace, who he is, what we do.
I
It's just for
think,
women though, right? Just for women voters?
Men and women.
hold-
Heat it up for you there, Mr. Yao. No, it's for
No,
everybody.
no.
How old is the league?
it's for everybody. The league, I just wanted to start off and say, is that okay, Edward? The League of Women Voters never supports or opposes any political party or political candidate. League members are always welcome, are always working on vital issues of a concern to members and to the public. And our voters guide, which is at vote411.org, presents unbiased explanation, we hope, and arguments for and against the proposed amendments in very plain language. And if you want to get involved, empowering voters and defending democracy, you could find the League of Women Voters Rio Grande Valley at LWV RGV.org. So welcome.
Can I ask you a question before you do your rundown? Is there, most constitutional amendments in Texas are pretty dry. Occasionally there's something sexy and exciting. Is there one this time?
There's a few.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I want to hear your voice then.
Okay.
The ones that are going to grab you. Because people are probably not going to remember what they say, but they're going to remember to vote yes on one or no on one, that kind of thing. So go ahead.
Very good. Okay, I'll be introducing Proposition 1.
Yep.
And yeah, there's an explanation, and it says this amendment would add professional
Rodeo is
rodeo
a sport.
charitable foundations
Rodeo
that
is
are
a sport.
sanctioned by the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association or the Women's Professional Rodeo Association to the list of similar foundations for other professional sports associations that are authorized to hold raffles. These raffles may be held at rodeos in the state of Texas.
These are charitable raffles,
Yes.
not just a raffle to raise money to send the kids to school. These are for charitable events.
These are for the
Okay.
charitable foundations, specifically these are for the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association or the Women's Professional Rodeo Association. they are wanting to hold raffles as well. Yeah, as far as arguments for the proposition, many other professional sports charitable foundations, such as those for the NFL, the MLB, or the NBA, are allowed to hold raffles. This proposed amendment broadens the field to include charitable rodeo foundations. Raffles of this type generate revenue for charities such as youth scholarship programs, the YMCA, and the American Cancer Society, among others. Now, the arguments against the proposition include that raffles are another form of gambling, which has negatively affected some Texas families. And also, this form of gambling could eventually be extended beyond professional sports to many other organizations.
Proposition 2 would be by Grace.
That's most important.
Okay, Proposition 2 is about county government. Okay, so y'all get out your pens and take notes. Proposition 2 allows the Texas Constitution, the Texas Constitution allows the legislature to authorize cities to issue bonds or notes to finance development or redevelopment of transportation or infrastructure in unproductive, underdeveloped, or blighted areas.
Cities or counties.
Proposition 2 would amend the Texas Constitution to add counties to the political entities that can issue bonds or notes for that purpose, and to pledge increases in property tax revenues to repay the bonds or notes. If the county issues bonds for transportation improvements, the counties may not allocate more than 65% of the property tax increases annually to repay the bond, and they may not use the bond proceeds to finance toll road construction, operation maintenance, or right-of-way acquisition. So arguments for this proposition: cities and towns can already finance infrastructure and transportation projects using bonds and notes. Counties also need the ability to address infrastructure issues. The development, another argument for, is the development or redevelopment of infrastructure or transportation is expected to increase property values. Higher property values would result in higher tax revenues to help repay these bonds. And the third argument for is Texas is growing and infrastructure and transportation development is needed for our future economic prosperity. The proposition would allow counties to use bonds to finance much needed infrastructure projects. Now there's some arguments against. This proposition would expand debt, which may raise local property taxes. Opponents say that Texas local debt ratio per person is too high, and issuing these bonds ties up future funds for debt service payment. And the third argument against is these transportation and infrastructure projects could divert revenues that may go to other government services or projects. Thank you. Now, Proposition 3.
So I'll be reading Proposition 3. This proposition proposed will be added directly to Article 1 of the Texas Constitution Bill of Rights. It would prohibit state or local governments from prohibiting or limiting religious services. This proposed amendment is a reaction to the restrictions put in place by the governor and some other local governments during the COVID-19 pandemic. The restrictions required religious services to be held remotely or limited the number of people who could attend in person. The governor's restrictions were in place for 12 days. He then declared that religious services are essential services and issued guidelines that said house of worship should conduct as many activities as possible remotely and should follow federal guidelines in providing services in person. No such restrictions would be put in place after, as would be added to the Bill of Rights. Arguments for: churches provide important support in times of crisis. Closing churches reduces access to these services. Proponents say that closing churches violates religious freedom guaranteed by the Constitution. A government official should not be able to keep anyone from attending religious services. Here are arguments against. The proposed amendment could prevent local governments from enforcing safety measures during natural disasters, such as tornadoes, hurricanes, and other pandemics. No faith group should have an unqualified right to spread a communicable disease. Existing law and the Texas Constitution adequately protect religious organization as is. That is Proposition 3. Handing over for Proposition 4 to Grace.
Right. Proposition 4 is about judges. So Proposition 4, the proposed amendment would change the eligibility requirement for judges to run for office for the following: for the Supreme Court, Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Regional Court of Appeals. Currently, the candidate for these courts must have been a practicing lawyer for at least 10 years, or a practicing lawyer or judge of court of record for a combined total of at least 10 years. The proposed amendment would add the requirement the candidate be licensed in the state of Texas for at least 10 years, and defines the court of record as a state court or county court established by the legislature. Also, during that 10-year period, the candidate's license to practice law must not have been revoked or suspended. So that's part of it. Unfortunately, there's a whole nother part. It's called state district judge. Currently, the candidate for state district judge must be a U.S. citizen, licensed to practice law in Texas, and have been a practicing lawyer for at least 4 years, or a practicing lawyer or judge of a Texas court for a combined total of 4 years. So that's 4. The proposed amendment would add the requirement that a district judge candidate be a Texas resident, and would change the 4-year requirement to 8 years. Also, during the specified 8-year period, the candidate's license to practice law must not have been revoked or suspended. So arguments for this proposed amendment: increasing the required number of years of legal experience for district court judge could result in a better qualified Texas judiciary. And the quality and reputation of the Texas judiciary could be enhanced by the requirement that a judge's license cannot have been revoked or suspended. Arguments against: the requirement of additional years of experience as an attorney could adversely impact the diversity, age, race, or gender of judicial candidates and judges. The amendment would restrict the size of the pool of candidates eligible to run for judicial positions, which could result in a judiciary that does not reflect the population that it serves. Okay, we have another one on judges, Proposition 5.
Okay, Proposition 5 is the constitutional amendment providing additional powers to the State Commission on Judicial Conduct with respect to candidates for judicial office. The State Commission on Judicial Conduct now accepts complaints against and investigates and takes actions concerning alleged misconduct by judges currently in office. This proposed amendment would extend the commission's power to judicial candidates. As arguments for the proposition, allowing misconduct charges against judicial candidates could result in fair judicial campaigns. Under current law, misconduct charges can be brought against judges currently in office, but not against candidates running for judicial office. Bringing complaints about judicial candidates as well as judges in office to the Commission on Judicial Conduct could ensure that complaints against both candidates and judges are heard and acted on. This could result in better screening of both candidates and judges. As arguments against, opponents say this amendment is unnecessary. Those who have complaints of misconduct against judicial candidates can file them with other authorities, such as the State Bar, the Attorney General, or the appropriate district attorney for investigation and action. Also, adding complaints against judicial candidates to the Commission on Judicial Conduct could overburden the commission and its staff with new cases.
Now we're on to Proposition 6. Grace.
Hold on. Proposition 6 is about caregiver visits. So I'm a former nurse, so I really, this is one that I'm glad I got to talk about. So the explanation for Proposition 6, caregiver visits. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Family and other caregivers were restricted from access to nursing homes and other group facilities. This proposed constitutional amendment would allow a resident to name a person to be their essential caregiver, and visits from their essential caregiver would become a resident's constitutional right. The legislature may provide guidelines for caregiver visitation policies and procedures. So arguments for Texans in group care, visitation by a loved one can help combat loneliness, anxiety, and depression, and can provide advocacy and emotional support. For residents with no remaining connections, there is comfort in having outside visitors into the facility. Arguments against. This amendment takes away the ability of public health and certain government officials to restrict access by outsiders to group care facilities in order to protect the residents and staff. Even if health and safety protocols are in place, visitation by outsiders could expose other residents and the staff to disease. Thank you. And now back to you with Proposition 7.
Thank you, Grace. Proposition 7 updates the Constitution to allow surviving spouses of disabled persons a limit on the school property taxes. Currently, this limitation is provided to homeowners over 65 years old and to disabled persons. To be eligible for this limit, the spouse must be at least 55 years old when the disabled person died and still live in the home. In 2019, the tax code was updated to allow this tax limitation for surviving spouses of disabled persons, but the legislator failed to authorize a proposed constitutional amendment. Some counties followed the tax code and some did not. For those that did not, eligible surviving spouses may be due a refund. Here are arguments for Proposition 7. This amendment would protect the surviving spouse of a disabled person from losing an important benefit. Next, the proposition validates a state law already passed and clarifies that the law is to be enforced. Finally, the proposed amendment passed 0 no votes in both Texas House and the Texas Senate, indicates that this has broad bipartisan support. Arguments against Proposition 7. The passage could reduce tax revenues for schools, school districts, and local taxing authorities. Next, any lower property values could decrease revenue and affect the state school funding formulas. Finally, this amendment could lead to further property tax exemptions, which could have future negative effects on school and other local finances. And finally, Proposition 8, leave to you, Grace.
Okay, Proposition 8 is about property tax again regarding the military. So Proposition 8, currently the surviving spouse of a member of the military who is killed in action is entitled to an exemption from property taxes. This exemption is for the property tax on the market value of the spouse's residence homestead if the spouse is not remarried. This amendment, this proposed amendment, would expand eligibility for the same exemption from property taxes for spouses of members of the military who are killed in the line of duty, rather than in action or combat. This means that if their death was due to injuries that are not combat related, such as in a training exercise, it was still the result of their duties in the military. Arguments. This amendment would correct an oversight in current law to include surviving spouses of the military who are killed in the line of duty rather than in action. These additional surviving spouses have suffered the loss of their partner because of their military service and should be provided the same benefit. Death in combat for our county soldiers should not be the determining factor on whether we honor their military service by providing relief for their spouses. Arguments against. This argument will reduce tax revenues to school districts, counties, cities, and special districts by lowering property value. Many more military are killed in the line of duty than are killed in action. The estimated potential loss for tax revenue could be significant. Any lower property values could decrease revenue and affect the state school funding formula. This amendment would expand property tax exemption to another group of people, which could increase the tax burden for other property owners. All right, thank you. And remember, if you forget any of this, you can go to vote411.org to review these propositions one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
The league is now done presenting the propositions.
But you're not done, right?
No.
Okay. You're still gonna stay here.
Any contentions? Concerns, any clarification you need?
I have lots of concerns, but nothing that I care to bring to everybody here. Let's start at the bottom, and that's because I think some of these are what appear to be housekeeping, straightening things up. They're not in and of themselves necessarily controversial. Proposition 8, I'm looking at the Texas Tribune analysis, property tax exemptions for military families. They say at the bottom of their analysis, this exemption, if it were to pass, would apply to fewer than 10 people a year. So but one thing I was curious about, maybe you guys, Robbie and Jim Darling, says would expand eligibility for residential homestead tax exemptions, which is a Texas thing, to include spouses of military members killed or fatally injured in the line of duty. Now, being shot in war, that I understand, or you were a pilot, so.
But, driving, I think one of the reasons it would be applicable to so few people is most of the guys at Fort Hood live in military housing. And so the opportunity to have a homestead on a military base, especially where that would happen, where, the line of duty would happen. I don't think it means if I was killed in a car going to the grocery store. You have to be somewhere on base and do a line of duty. And so I just think that that's so few a number of people that would actually have a house, because in your military, you're moving every 2-3 years, that, yeah, it's a nice gesture by the legislature. It's kind of why there's 680 amendments. As a parliamentarian, they couldn't figure out, hey, this has already been covered, or it was illegal in the first place and not constitutional. And so it's just a reason why we shouldn't have so many amendments to the Constitution. Is very complicated. But I think the applicability to the individuals is relatively rare because of that.
The Texas Constitution was ratified February 15, 1876. And there was an attempt in the 70s. I think Dolph Briscoe, the then governor, called a constitutional convention, and people went, and they didn't adopt it. They didn't adopt a new one. They couldn't agree on it.
They don't trust the legislature.
Hmm?
They don't trust the legislature. You got to be like the federal Constitution. The legislature can determine charitable, for instance, raffles.
Well,
As a matter of course, instead of, the highlight people are going to be coming in saying, where can I have my raffle? Which is really ironical, because the Texas has one of the largest lotteries in the state. None of it goes to charity. It goes to the state and however they want to use it ultimately.
Well, let's go to Proposition 1, rodeo raffles. We talked about this on the radio, and I confess I did not do my homework. It will allow charitable raffles at rodeo events. And I just thought, I've been to rodeos. What charitable events are they talking about? Maybe the guy got hurt in the bull riding, but it's not that at all. This extends, in 2015, we approved a rule that allows charitable raffles at professional sports games, like football games, baseball games. This just extends it to rodeo. And
Rodeo is a sport.
rodeo,
by the
let me tell you, my
Constitution.
father helped. Yes, my father did that. He was a rodeoer. I'll find out and be on the talk show tomorrow. How many rodeos are there? How many professional rodeos, not professional rodeos, are there in Texas? More than you would think. There's lots of amateur rodeos, but that's not what this applies to. So this allows the rodeo at the Houston Livestock Show or the San Antonio to have a raffle for, whatever. But it's got to be charitable and not just to benefit somebody.
It's kind of confusing too, because it says a team sport or sports team. So I never thought rodeos being a team sport. But if people want to have charitable,
They don't rodeo in upstate New York, do they? Where
No.
do they? Where Jim's from?
Yeah.
Well, I think the aim is good, right?
yeah, the aim's good.
Allowing
And
them, but-
it's over. Everybody else gets to do it. So why wouldn't rodeo people have their own charitable events?
How
I think
many?
to the mayor's point, why does that have to be a constitutional amendment?
Right.
Because this is Texas.
It is Texas. We've had over 500
amendments passed to the Constitution.
Again, they couldn't decide 40, 50 years ago on
Right.
the changes. They met for a long time and it went for a vote and it didn't get up. Now, what would happen if they did it this time? But, you know, I don't see, as contentious as things are, do you all think that they would convene a month long in Austin I think it'd be you didn't ask, but I think it'd be a train wreck. So we'll just keep on amending this thing. Now, what I first thought of is, why do they want to legalize what people are doing anyway? Not the rodeo people, but how many raffles are there, cards for ball games where the person doing it keeps a piece of it, which makes it by definition illegal? But that's super common, isn't it?
Well, always a profit. I remember going back to nonprofits, you could have a raffle, but if it was going to be a cash prize, that was illegal. So that was always a problem for nonprofits. Even a nonprofit couldn't have a raffle for a cash prize, and that's where you get the most people
Yeah.
participating in a raffle. So this has just been a real problem area anyways, in Texas. And
Yeah.
like I say, kind of everything else seems childish when you got the biggest lottery in the country. And
I think
by the
one
way, look at
concern-
the odds of in the state lottery. You got a better chance winning something at this raffle, at this rodeo raffle.
How many tickets do you buy a week? How many tickets do y'all buy a week? None.
But you know, one concern about that amendment is that, and I think, you know, overall the aim is good, but it empowers private organizations to allow other organizations to do the raffle in their name.
Yeah.
So I think that's aimed at the foundations. but
Yeah.
They could theoretically, you know, give
Yeah.
that to anybody.
I was on like the Boys Club.
Yeah.
Bingo is a big business, and the nonprofits get a very small percentage of that bingo revenue. But you know, that's okay too. So people want to do bingo, but I mean, all this means good, but it's just kind of an example of overplay by the Constitution and why we're having this amendment in the first place.
So Proposition 8 extends property tax exemptions to military families, someone killed in the line of duty or fatally injured in the line of duty. Number 7, property tax exemptions for bereaved families. This will put a limit on school property taxes, school district property taxes incurred by the surviving spouse of a person with disabilities. Somebody older than 65, 66 is disabled, dies. The surviving spouse would, in most cases, be able to have that property tax exemption extended to them. I don't know what that would cost us. They do an analysis of that, but I have not seen it. Have y'all?
I have not.
I always thought it
Can't
should
be that
be,
many.
it should be a local thing up to the school district to put it up for election if they want to do that in their school district. You know, I mean, I understand the state's effort to want to help those people, but in some school districts, it's a different situation, and it ought to be up to the school district.
We've had a lot of these.
Voters of the
Yeah.
school district.
Maybe they should, but I guess if they go to the local state rep or senator, it's hard for that person to turn them away. So they boot it to the legislature, and, you know, boy, it's tough to get something through the legislature. Number 6, essential caregiver designation. Is this an issue when people were sick in the hospital with COVID, whether they survived or died? They couldn't designate a wife or a spouse or a loved one to come see them? Does anybody know?
Yes. So well, I want to make sure that this.
You should
proposition-
know.
I should know, yes. This proposition doesn't apply to hospitals, it applies to nursing homes.
Okay.
And allows nursing, it constitutionalizes a right for patients to designate up to 2 caregivers.
Okay.
And I think, to the mayor's point is, why would this need to be in the Constitution? I think COVID-19, you had a lot of situations where families couldn't see their loved ones, their elderly in nursing homes. But we also had the opposite of that, where nursing homes became breeding grounds because of
Yes.
outside people coming in, bringing in COVID to the most vulnerable in our
Yeah.
community. And you saw high rates of death and infection in nursing homes. So there's a balance here.
Yeah.
I
This
actually
ties their
think this
hands in.
proposition, well, the proposition does defer to the legislature passed legislation that can mitigate. It's not a total prohibition, right? So nursing homes under SB 25, which is a bill that passed, Senator Colcourse passed, does allow nursing homes to request from the state agency up to 7 days to not prohibit, but to suspend these rules for 7 days if there's rates of high infection. It does require the caregiver to take training or whatever's required under the nursing home.
Really?
Yes, and to follow, then to sign a attestation that they will follow the rules. So I think overall, this proposition does strike a good balance, allowing those visitors, but allowing the nursing home to enact protocols and procedures to prevent infection.
Well, what kind of training do you have to go see your ailing mother?
Training to put on personal protective equipment and how to do it.
Yeah, can you require mask, you know, and is somebody else is gonna say you can't do mask and those, so I think there's some confusion. Who could forget the husband outside and the wife's in the nursing home, he's outside the
yeah.
window, who can forget those pictures? So I understand what this is for.
Well, if I'm a
But I-
nursing home owner, I'm looking at this and going, this commands me. I have no choice if this passes to allow people to come in, whether they're qualified or not. And I can show them how to use the protective gear, but that doesn't mean they're going to do it. And then I throw them out and then I got a lawsuit.
And some don't have isolation areas where you could isolate. There's a lot of details. I understand the intent, but there's a lot of details. Robbie and I worked for a hospital where we dealt with family disputes on who could see the patients all the time.
Really?
Very, very difficult process. I couldn't remember a week that didn't go by that didn't happen. And so you're really putting the nursing home in positions of, you know, you better train their staff on how to handle this stuff too.
Well, how'd the hospital do it? How'd DHR do it?
Very difficult.
Well, initially, you know, actually through the governor's orders, executive orders, we had to ban all visitors to the hospital.
Yeah.
But eventually that transitioned into having patients, visitors, families sign waivers and teaching them how to don the PPE, how to go in, you know, we do allow what we call compassionate visits. Family members visit their members.
Did you have any? go
Yeah.
ahead.
What do you do when somebody's in intensive care? You don't let visitors in intensive care, you know, I mean, it is really kind of a COVID related, not a one-time thing, but a COVID, very serious illness kind of related thing where people.
What was DHR's experience with people being told, here's what you have to do, and if you don't do it, then we're going to have to ask you to
We
leave?
had a mix. Some family members understood because of COVID and the risk of infection, not only to themselves, but to other patients. Other families were visibly distraught and, you know, wanted to see their family member. I mean, it's a mix, and it's a very hard situation for all involved.
Yeah.
For the hospital doesn't want to keep anybody out, believe me. We want family members to visit.
We want to stay overnight.
Especially where you have two different sections of the family, like this
Yeah.
family and like that part of the family. I don't know what this does to them, but it's a very difficult thing to handle in the first place. Maybe this law maybe complicates that ultimately.
Oh, yeah, it would complicate. If they're going to argue at the hospital, they're going to argue at the nursing
Yeah.
home. I would think
So
so.
hopefully it won't.
All right, that's number 6. I need to check. I don't confuse my own self. Let's go back up to number 2. Tax financing. This sort of surprises me.
Ooh.
Tax financing for county infrastructure.
This is the biggest one, the most important one in all of them.
Really?
Yeah, financially, sure it is. I think this is significant too, and to a certain extent, you know, the state doesn't allow cities to annex anymore without the permission of property owner. I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see big portions that would be and urbanizing and into a city limits being outside and needing new infrastructure requirements as they do kind of the colonial growth. Hopefully not that bad, but you could see that because you don't have to annex.
Well-
County standards are much lower than most city standards. And you can see some infrastructure needs now that you don't have right now, but 10 years from now are going to be, and who's going to pay for those? And so right now, most bond issues within the city affect those people in the city. If it's county, it affects everybody, every taxpayer, including within the city and out. So I think a couple of things. I think it's going to be complicated. It's going to be expensive, but it's also be hard to pass in cities that have large urban areas. Because why would a city person want to help a county deal with county infrastructure needs that would normally not be, I wouldn't have to travel out there or whatever in a rural area, especially drainage and those kind of things.
Well, let's look at getting your mind's eye Hidalgo County.
Yeah.
Cameron County, a big part of Cameron County has already been annexed by the city of Brownsville with the map I looked at.
But there's huge portions in Cameron County that don't have drainage. They have propositions for over $100 million bond issues to deal with drainage issues in the county. You know,
Huh.
they still have to pass those from that standpoint. So
Well, number 2, according to this from the Texas Tribune, this amendment would authorize counties to issue bonds or notes to raise money for transportation infrastructure, which I read as, you know, road surfaces and then whatever else goes along with that in underdeveloped areas. I assume that'll be a legal definition, underdeveloped area. Already, cities and towns have the authority to fund projects with this financing method. Counties would repay these bonds by pledging increased property tax revenues. So these bonds will be backed by tax revenues. But the money cannot be used for construction, for maintenance, or acquisition of toll roads. And we see the Austin dislike of toll roads in that. So
Many transportation infrastructure has a drainage component. If you look at the expressway, you see those big, huge pipes.
Yeah.
That's a drainage component that comes along with transportation. So they could already do drainage under existing state law and do ad valorem taxation for it. We have a lot of those bond issues.
well, right, you mentioned earlier, I think the previous legislature, the majority passed a law that says cities cannot, they had a certain amount of annexation authority. You can't use that. They have to vote to agree to be annexed.
Property owner, yes.
So if they don't vote to, be annexed, you can't annex them. And I don't know of any votes down here in the valley over annexation, but
Not, it's a property owner.
what about why does the county? I thought I would assume the county had the authority to float bonds backed by tax revenues to build infrastructure, whatever that is, which I assume, do you know what this means? I guess is what I'm trying to say. They can't, they have to pay back with increased property tax revenues, but they can't use it to build toll roads. So they can build a road out in an underdeveloped area. That'll be a legal definition. Y'all are lawyers. Don't look at me that way.
I think that now the limit is on counties that they can't issue bonds or notes to pay for those. They can pay for the infrastructure now. They just can't issue bonds or notes. Cities can, so it's kind of like equalizing the.
They can do drainage. I don't know if there's a transportation problem. And farm to market roads are generally state.
Yeah.
And so most roads out in the rural area are state roads anyhow. That's kind of an issue too. Is
This sounds like it's in response to some county that wanted to do
Right.
something, didn't have the authority.
right. I think so. I know we've done hundreds of millions of dollars of tax paid bonds in Hidalgo County, primarily for drainage, but some streets, roads.
Well, maybe we'll find out who put that bug in the legislature's ear. Here's the one. Number 3. I'm surprised we haven't heard something about this. Y'all can talk, y'all can chime in. If you have-
Number 3 is one of the latest ones. Has to do with just freedoms.
Does this mean, number 3, that God forbid COVID continues or there's something the same or worse that follows it and they shut down churches or churches shut themselves down? They don't have in-person, like Catholic Church didn't have masses, as I understand. Our church did not meet. We met virtually. But occasionally you'll read about somebody who wants to start a church in their house. And it's not just 10 people show up, it's 100 people show up. Explain this. That sounds like they can hold church next to me and I don't have a thing to say about it in these circumstances.
I think it's good for lawyers because I wanted to find sincerely held religious beliefs. So we'll find out what that means.
I think one major problem,
It depends on what my religion wants me not to do. It's
Yeah.
always what they want you
Exactly.
not to do.
well, this
The church of the
prohibit-
no mask.
it doesn't allow government agencies to prohibit or limit. So
Okay.
county judge can't even say you can have religious ceremonies, but you must socially distance. So I think it's very broad. And I read it as in any situation, religious ceremonies, or they can have services to their heart's extent, which I mean, it's good for religious freedom, right?
Yeah.
But in a pandemic, why isn't it reasonable to ask a church to socially distant or that, and those kind of restrictions, which I believe are reasonable?
How does the city
I
of
would
McAllen
say it would
handle it?
be like the church of, I got a right to wear my handgun, but we already have that already done. So we don't have to worry about that being religious.
Yes, we do. And even, this is Texas, by the way. But how does the city of McAllen handle this? This would be for you, this is what you ought to know about, which was people holding church services and then somebody calls the city and complains, COVID or not, what's the rule?
We have some of that, and especially in neighborhoods, like you mentioned, where you don't have appropriate zoning. You have to be really careful on zoning in that, but we've had, and that's where it was started off as several people and then became 20 and then 30 and parking restriction, problems and all that. So Usually you work that out and tell them if you're so successful, start your own little, and that's what usually happens ultimately. And so they usually work out. And if you just stand back and try to get everybody reasonable, it works out. But use that delicately, the
You don't put
power
the
of,
hammer. So,
the power of the government you should use very delicately, and that's. in
so
those
the
situations.
hammer has not been put down in McAllen. Is that what you're saying? You have not had to do that?
No, we've had to work with people and it's been successful.
If
And usually sometimes bigger parishes will allow somebody then to come in and use smaller church or
this
some other
wouldn't,
facility. And then
would this be an issue with the Roman Catholic Church? They're so organized. Do they have house churches? No?
I don't think this was meant for house church. I don't think it was meant to address that. I think
know.
it's a COVID issue. And
But you know how lawyers are. They're going to
And
read
it's-
this and figure a way to get around it.
well, I think the Constitution is how you get around it. I mean, the Constitution is still stronger than this amendment,
Okay.
As
As a practical matter, this probably is not going to affect really much of anybody, I would think.
No,
No.
it's to address the unusual belief.
Is the issue the parking, or is the issue the loud singing, or is the issue people coming and going, or what?
All the above generally, yeah. But not for, this is not to address that. This is just to address COVID.
Yeah, this is just in the case of. so-
Yeah, the Constitution, both the Texas and the United States take care of this.
I'm getting hand signals, and it's not what you people think the hand signal is. What is this? I'm getting to 4. Okay. Hurrying right along. 4 and 5 in some ways are the same. 4 has to do with state judge eligibility. The law, the Constitution will be changed so that a lawyer would have to have 10 years of experience practicing law. I guess that means not just a graduated lawyer, but practicing law to be eligible to run for the Texas Supreme Court, the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest criminal court in Texas, or a Texas Court of Appeals. In our case, it would be the one in Corpus, the 13th Court of Appeals. Right now, you have to have 10 years, but you could do 10 years in Louisiana, then move here and run. Additionally, candidates running to be a district judge, which is what most of us will be familiar with, if you have to go to court, would need 8 years of law practice or judicial experience in a Texas court. Now it's only 4 years. So theoretically, go to law school, get out at 24, pass the bar, get your paper, and 4 years later, you could be a district judge deciding whether people live or die and millions of dollars worth of property, and just good or bad.
It doesn't matter. And it's 4 years, not judicial experience, it's 4 years as a lawyer. And we ought to just, who here knows the qualifications of any judge? We have 30 judges we elect. Who in Harris County ever can look for the qualifications of a judge? Because there's no panels that just run. And if you're an incumbent, it's very difficult to beat you. And we ought to run nonpartisan anyways, but that's just my opinion.
I can help you beat that drum. I beat that drum for years, and we still elect them by party.
It's nice that they're raising qualifications, but it doesn't matter who.
You're bet.
I agree with the mayor.
Mr. Cynic, hang on, I'll get to you. It'd be better to have them have 4 years more than be right behind the ears. I mean, you're deciding big issues. That doesn't mean they're not going to get elected. I've seen some people elected here that look like they just started shaving. They want to be a district judge. I'm not sure why. But it's better to require them a little more experience than a little less.
Sure, but it still doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
Who let him on this panel anyway?
It's a nice gesture, but it doesn't, all it does is going to have somebody that's 28 instead of 24.
We'll come back to that in a second, because that really is a serious issue. Robbie, what were you say?
Well, I generally agree with the mayor. I do think experience is good, and I think it will add something to it. But you could have somebody elected as a district judge with 2 years of experience, and for all you know, that person is going to be the best judge we've ever had,
Yeah.
versus somebody who's had 25 years and they're the worst judge we've ever had.
It's like the DA advertisement. They always show the DA in front of arguing in front of a jury.
Mhm.
If a DA tries a case in front of a jury, he shouldn't be a DA. He needs to be a law office manager. That's his qualification. They have 70 lawyers in the DA office. He needs to know how to hire and fire lawyers. He doesn't need to be a good criminal
It's
lawyer.
not like on
But
TV.
that's what they usually see DA in front of a jury and arguing and all that stuff. But It's kind of, that's not the qualification you're really looking for.
Judicial by the way, do you know, I don't remember any really young person, man or woman, ever being elected to the Court of Criminal Appeals in Corpus or the Court of Criminal Appeals, Texas Court of Appeals in Corpus Criminal Court or the Texas Supreme Court. I don't remember anybody. They elect them young here sometimes in the Valley, but I don't remember anybody really young statewide. Do you all?
I don't.
They're pretty seasoned as a rule, which is what you would want. Judicial misconduct process. Robbie decides.
Court of Criminal Appeals, it should require experience as a judge. I think.
But it doesn't.
No. I mean, that's what you would, if you were looking for experience for somebody in Court of Criminal, Civil or
Yeah.
Criminal Appeals, you'd expect somebody that has some judicial experience as a judge in those areas. But anyways,
Right now, if you feel like a district judge or county court at law judge, I guess even justice of peace or municipal court judges, you can call them up or write them and saying that person, he's a dog, he's this, that, and the other, and they take it and they investigate it and do something or not. Mostly we never find out about it, correct?
right.
And that could be for grave mistakes or not. This would apply the same measuring stick to people running. Where did that come from?
You know, I'm not in favor because you could make a claim against somebody. It could be
Oh, yeah.
pending while the election. And it's like, if you're indicted, you're guilty kind of deal. I think there'd be abuse for that.
I think there's a risk of politicizing
Yeah.
the Commission on Judicial Conduct.
Yeah, I don't think they
Code of
want
conduct.
that. I don't think anybody asked the current members for
So-
that.
Yeah.
They wanted to
I-
do
So
I
that.
think
Proposition
I think it's
5.
probably more dangerous than good.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that's a way to get headlines into. Right now, if I lodge a complaint against Judge Darling, do they put out a press release saying we accepted a complaint against Judge Darling? Can't tell you what it is, but we're looking into it. No,
No,
I mean, we don't know. It's only when there's discipline.
Right.
but you could leak things.
I don't require any leaks. I don't remember any leaks.
I don't remember
recently.
too much. No, it's because they're pretty rare, by the way.
Yeah. All right, so I think that's a no vote on Proposition 5 from this side of the panel. Y'all want to say anything? Y'all aren't lawyers, are you?
We have to remain nonpartisan.
Oh.
And,
Well, these are party
and
things.
have a
Okay,
controversial.
We're not taking a stand on any of them this
I think
time.
we've done these all. I want to come back to the judge thing, but Grace Chimene of Texas League of Women Voters, do you have a view on any of this that you would like to share?
We have the League of Women Voters of Texas. We had volunteers review it. We had volunteers try to write it in plain language. We had volunteers who did the pros and cons. We chose not to take a stand on any of them. So
Okay.
we would like the voters to decide after reading the voter's guide, whether they're going to vote yes or no. Yes.
They ought to have a third category, yes, no, or other, or I
Yes.
don't care, or I can't understand it.
What?
Another category, so voters could go back to legislature and say, we don't know what you're trying to do.
Now, I had a friend tell me once, in all seriousness, that if you don't know about a constitutional amendment, vote no, because nothing appears on that ballot that's not the product of special pleading or somebody who had an in at the legislature. That's pretty cynical, because I don't, some of these you can look at and say, I don't know what angle there was. Some of these, I think we've agreed there's an angle apparently. That doesn't mean I'm not going to vote for it, but back to the judges. Right now, and I guess it's always been this way, and I remember reading that this is a reaction to essentially the Civil War and Reconstruction. The reason Texas elects everything is, my God, because that's the way we want it. We don't want anybody choosing this stuff for us, so we elect everybody. I think we're probably growing away from that because the ballots can get very, very long. With judges, there have been attempts to move away from party election of judges to nonpartisan election of judges, which is a broad category. There's a lot of ways to do that. One in Texas, because the Democratic Party was it for years, the tradition was for a district judge to retire in the middle of his term, because it was always a him, it was never her. Retire in the middle of the term, and then the judge will appoint somebody to take their place. Then they would run as the incumbent. Well, that's election retention right there. It just was one party. And I don't know if it worked well or ill. Y'all, I don't think Robbie was practicing law then, but you might have practiced law in front of people like
Right.
that. But both parties have been very resistant. They do not want to move away from the non-party election of judges. So in Harris County, all the Democrats get in, all the Republicans lose. They could be, touched by God, but they're still out. And it's the same thing in Republican areas, although there are fewer of them in big cities now. Do you think it'll change?
No. It's interesting about elected officials. In Hidalgo County, I tried to count one time, there's about 500 elected officials.
Was it really?
We look at all the water districts, school districts,
yeah.
cities, special districts. Where do you get all these people to do that? To want to go ahead and do that? And so I think that's a good idea, is take a look at how many people we elect in Texas. And maybe there's a different way.
I don't know, but I think we've reached the end of our time and perhaps our patience. And you can go, there's a lot of places you can see these ballot propositions, these constitutional amendments, and decide for yourself what you want to do. All of my jokes aside, you need to study this. I go and vote on all these. I vote on all, and is it kind of, it's not sexually exciting, I have to admit, but it is something that needs to be done. It's, in some ways, it's a hallmark of our ability to govern ourselves. And particularly in these days when things are so contentious and we think we can't govern ourselves, this is something which is calm to the point of boring that we can do, and it's very important.
But I
There are
think you
also
made a good
municipal
point.
elections.
If you don't know, maybe you should, it's up to you to vote for everything, but if you don't know, should you vote? I mean, that's something you have to decide yourself. You can't
Well,
figure it out.
Yeah, but
would-
remember how easy it is for people to go and just compare it. Just really simply read the voter's guide or watch a little video. It's a little 2-minute video and it'll just tell you, and then you can decide. So it's not rocket science, but I think they can do it.
There's been several times when, if you read it, it actually said exactly opposite what it was going to do.
Yeah.
That's why we.
This is good. I don't think there's anything like that, but that's true. I mean, sometimes they word them because they want them to go a certain way.
Yeah.
No question.
When are you going to declare for the State House of Representatives? I'll vote for you. I mean, maybe.
I don't think it's appropriate to announce any candidacy during this.
No. All right, that's it. We're done. It's time to go home.
Well, I want to thank our panelists, our technical staff, and I want to thank all of you who are watching tonight and all of you who will be watching it on our website, which is www.futurorgv.org, and it will be on there until the election. So do watch it. And I want to remind you, our meeting has already started. And, Election day is November the 2nd. And I want to repeat, honor your right to vote. Find out what the issues are as best you can. And then go and vote. It's your privilege, it's your honor,
It's your right.
and it's your responsibility.
It's your duty.
So register and vote. Thank you. That's right.
So we're done, right?
I don't know, we still might be live.
Don't say anything until.
I appreciate, I don't know how do you explain?